All right, the war is over, and obviously it just sets up conflict to become. So, what's the legacy of the war? We've got 8 million soldiers dead, 21 million wounded, right? These men are returning from war with scars, both physical and mental. The walking wounded, we have men scarred by chemical burns and gas attacks and missing limbs. You can see Europe, especially northern France and Belgium, is just devastated. The economies of the European countries are drained. This new technology that was introduced brings in a huge amount of civilian casualties and death. Here we have one of the cemeteries there in northern France. Could be to commemorate Verdun, can't remember. And then you have, of course, a huge refugee status here, right, as people are on the move. And then there is a disillusionment for the war. How do I know this? Because remember when we left off, Europe was all good times, right? They were liberal, enlightened liberals. This has been going on for since the 1800s. Here's some pretty artwork, right, by Renoir. And how do I know that Europeans are affected by World War One? Because look at the art that comes out afterwards, right? So this, to me, is symbolic of the disillusionment. Boom, right? This is Salvador Dali and Pablo Picasso. Does this art look like anything we've ever seen? Think back to the Renaissance. So to me, the art, both the literature and the paintings, philosophy is dark and fragmented, just as the people were after the war. So let's look at the peace agreement. And of course, I'm going to put peace in quotation marks. So it's a flawed peace and will cause, of course, all sorts of trouble. And you're going to hear me belabor this point for the next several weeks. So here is Versailles Palace. You remember, of course, home of the Sun King, Louis XIV. It is here that the nations of Europe meet to hash out a peace. So remember, the armistice was signed in November of 1918, but it's January 1919 that everybody meets here in Versailles, outside of Paris. And here is one of the conference rooms where they meet and hash out peace. But really, it just sets up World War II. Okay, so here we are, Paris Peace Conference. What do we need to remember? It is dominated by the big four. This here is Woodrow Wilson, representing, of course, the United States. And I'm going to pretend that this is Georges Clemenceau, who is the president of France. Big country number 3, of course, is David Lloyd George here, representing Great Britain, the prime minister. And what? Who's this? Country number 4, that is Italy. That's right, you heard me correctly. Italy is considered the big 4. And this is the prime minister of Italy, Vittorio Orlando. So I know what you're thinking. Wait a second. Aren't we missing some people? Why, yes, we are. Notice Germany is not there because they are now the bad guys. Even though Austria-Hungary started it, it'll be Germany that's punished. So notice they are not there. And of course, I know what you're thinking. Where's Russia? Well, Russia's battling it out in an ugly civil war, which we have discussed in class. So these 4 people are going to make all the decisions. So here comes Woodrow Wilson. That's right, the United States. We're now a major power player. And Wilson comes in. Unfortunately, he is an idealist, as said here in this political cartoon. And he has a lot of dreams that the Europeans will shoot down and pop those bubbles. So Woodrow Wilson brings with him 14 points, and this is the name given to Wilson's peace plan. Let me tell you a couple things, couple points here, and you can decide why you think the Europeans might not like it. One of his 14 points was to end secret treaties, secret alliances. Another point was to open the seas for free trade. He also said, hey, why don't we kind of take down these armies a notch and build smaller armies? And of course, you can imagine what the Europeans will say to this point. Hey, why don't we readjust some of these colonial claims in these empires? Maybe we should be fair towards the colonial people. Oh, Wilson, you crazy man. You think the Europeans are going to go for that? Added with adjustment of colonial claims, he also wanted to bring this point called self-determination, which is an important key word. I'd write that down, which means that people can decide for themselves under what government they wish to live. So he's thinking, hey, maybe those people in India, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, maybe they should decide what kind of government they should have. And I think you can imagine the Europeans will just laugh him right out of town. So the last of his points, the 14th point, was something called to build something called the League of Nations. What is the League of Nations? Well, it would be a league of nations who would come together and cooperate. Rather than go to war, they would talk out their problems and avoid something like this in the future. Since you probably have never heard of the League of Nations, I think you can decide how successful that will be. But of course, it is certainly the father of what will become the United Nations. So Wilson comes in with this idealism. Remember, the United States has not battled out this horrific war. We were only there for a short time, so we still maybe are a little too hopeful. So Europeans will laugh him out of town, especially with all that self-determination business and helping colonial people. That certainly doesn't fly. So they're going to sign a lot of treaties, but the one that we'll talk about the most is called the Treaty of Versailles. So the Paris Peace Conference, multiple treaties are signed, but the one we will talk about is the Treaty of Versailles. What are the flaws? There are many. So why do we care about this? Well, the Treaty of Versailles was signed between Germany and the Allies. So remember, Germany will then be punished. The British and the French take this as an opportunity to get rid of their big rival. Remember, before the war, Germany was one of the most powerful countries in Europe. So they're going to try to crush them. So you can see in this political cartoon, here's Germany, and they're going to be weighed down here by some of the clauses of the Treaty of Versailles. So the first thing we should know about is the war guilt clause. That means Germany, by signing this treaty, agrees that they share the blame, that they take the guilt of World War I. Along with that guilt comes in reparations. Guess who has to pay for this war? Germany. Remember, Germany's hurt after the war, but they're not devastated. Paying for the damages, the reparations, this will devastate Germany. They are also made to reduce their military, and they will lose territory. Remember, not only their colonial territory or their colonial holdings in Africa and Asia, but that little Alsace-Lorraine territory will go back to France. So this is brutal, right? This is really going to devastate Germany. And of course, the British and French are happy because it takes out their rival. Okay, Treaty of Versailles, right? Everybody, let me just go back to that. Everybody's angry. Unless you're British or French, this treaty, pardon my language, sucks. The British and French, they're going to make out like bandits, but everybody else is furious. One, the United States. Wilson will go back to this treaty, but after what they saw, Americans are like, no thanks. We don't want any part of Europe's messiness. So the United States will reject the treaty and they will never sign it. Other allies are ticked. The Italians and the Japanese, hey, they fought as allies. They got nothing. They expected some colonial territory as well. That they lose out completely to Germany. Russia, they were left out of the peace process altogether. I mean, for the most part, they're fighting out their civil war, but this will lead to a deep distrust of Western Europe because the Russians were not consulted. And of course, the bitterness that the Germans have over this treaty will last forever, especially against the democratic government that was formed in when the Kaiser stepped down. The Germans will hold that government, known as the Weimar Republic, responsible for this awful treaty. So, look at Europe. This is Europe 1914. This is Europe, boom, 1919. So, hello, new countries, right? There's Poland, it's back. The Austrian Empire has broken up, right? All those nationalities got their own nation state. Czechoslovakia has emerged. Here is tiny Austria now, and Hungary. And what's this? A brand new country known as Yugoslavia, which means Southern Slavs. So Serbia got what they wanted, right? A nation of Slavic people. So here's tiny Albania. But Poland is a new place here. We've got a new country, Finland, and these Baltic states. But don't get too attached, folks. These countries are going to disappear once again. But we'll wait for that after World War II. Also, the world perspective here. The Paris Peace Conference is disastrous. So lots of people come here, right? We've got the Arabs who have been promised self-determination because they helped the British fight the Ottomans. Of course, they don't get anything. Ho Chi Minh, a Vietnamese nationalist, he's in Paris looking to ask the Americans to get the French out of Vietnam. We've got the Japanese here represented saying, hey, we were allies. We expect some certain things. But of course, the Europeans ignore them. And then here's Chaim Weizmann, who is also a Zionist. Remember, he's saying, hey, we would like a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Now that the Ottoman Empire is gone, we'd like to take some of that territory for some of the European Jews. So again, all these people come to Paris and nobody gets what they want, which leads to not only World War II, but some ugliness after the war. All right, so the legacy of the Treaty of Versailles, right? It's going to build up tension here in the colonial holdings. It'll bring up tension here in what is today considered the Middle East, especially between Jews and Arabs. We've got tension building here in what is Yugoslavia. And we'll see, of course, the rise of these fine gentlemen, Mussolini and Hitler, right? Everybody's angry. So this is these are some of the famous conflicts of the 20th century, right? Some of these happens in my lifetime, in your lifetime. This will be in my lifetime. So the legacy of the Treaty of Versailles and the Paris Peace Conference is long-lasting and really sets up conflict for the rest of the century. So good times ahead.